My name is Margaret Maggie Collins. And 1 hour after we lowered my husband William into the ground, I was told to find another table. We were at the luncheon after the funeral, the room humming with whispers and cheap pity. Patricia Moore, his eldest, rose with a smile that cut. "This is for real family," she said. "Not gold-digging second wives." I did not argue. I reached into my bag, laid a cream envelope in the center of their linen tablecloth, and watched the color drain from 3 faces. William's handwriting was on the front, steady and unmistakable. It read, "To be opened after my funeral. Patricia Moore, the banker who schedules kindness like a meeting." Froze first. Robert Moore tried to look brave and failed, his jaw fluttering. Jennifer Moore whispered something about dignity, as if she owned the word. None of them touched the envelope. I told them they were right about one thing. The moment is about family, about who actually showed up when the chemo made nights 30 hours long. I slid into the chair they had claimed and folded my hands. If they wanted truth, their father had left it in ink. People think letters rescue reputations, but this one was a match. It would not just clear my name, it would torch their story of themselves. I watched panic arrive in waves, tidy and quiet, as servers pretended not to stare. Someone's fork hit the floor. A small metal bell for the reckoning. "Read it," I said, "and then decide who belongs at this table. But listen closely, because what is written here did not happen by accident. William was many things, but above all, he was prepared. And if you think this letter merely saved me, you're wrong. It burned the world instead." After the funeral, the quiet was heavier than grief. The house smelled like lilies and cold coffee, and every surface still carried William's orderliness. For 8 years, I'd lived inside that calm, believing kindness could outlast resentment. I was wrong about his children, Patricia. Robert and Jennifer had never seen me as anything more than a placeholder. From the start, I made it easy for them to ignore me. I never tried to replace their mother. I only wanted peace. At family dinners, they shared stories that began with, "Before Dad met Maggie," as if I were a footnote. Jennifer once asked me to pour her coffee and then laughed. "At least she's useful." William said they'd adjust with time. 8 years passed, and they never did. When William was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, everything shifted, but not how I expected. The children, suddenly attentive, began visiting weekly, always with questions about wills, trusts, and Dad's legacy. They called it concern. I called it calculation. I was the one holding William's hand through chemo, the one who heard him whisper through the pain that he was sorry for what I endured. The luncheon at Romano's had been my idea, a way to honor William where he'd felt happiest. I never imagined it would become the stage for my humiliation. When Jennifer stood and blocked me from the table, every memory of their cruelty returned at once. I remember thinking, this is what happens when you confuse civility with weakness. The envelope I placed before them wasn't an act of impulse. It was a promise William had entrusted to me weeks earlier. He'd sealed it himself and said only, "They'll understand when the time comes." Now the time had arrived, and none of them were ready for what their father truly thought of them. They stared at the envelope like it might explode. Patricia whispered something to Robert, and Jennifer's hands trembled as she pretended not to care. Around us, the restaurant fell silent. Forks paused midair. Conversations broke off. I almost pitied them. Almost. I told them that William's letter would answer the question they'd been asking for years: who really belonged in this family. Their smirks faded. For the first time in 8 years, I had their full attention, and I intended to keep it. Patricia was the first to touch the envelope. Her manicured nails hesitated on the edge, as though it might burn. She looked at me once, then tore it open with trembling hands. William's handwriting flowed across the page, measured, deliberate, as if he had written each word, knowing it would be the last voice they'd ever hear from him. He began by thanking them for attending his funeral and asking them to remember the man he had been, not the image they had created. Then his tone shifted. He wrote that love and respect were not the same thing, and that in the last 8 years, he had seen little of either from his children. He said he had spent too much time pretending not to notice their cruelty toward the woman who cared for him when no one else did. Patricia's lips moved as she read, but no sound came out. Robert leaned over her shoulder, his face draining of color. Jennifer reached for the paper, whispering that it couldn't be real. But it was. Every word was his phrasing, his restraint, his painful precision. William had been many things, but sentimental was not one of them. When he wrote, he meant to be understood. The second page revealed what they feared most. William had rewritten his will 6 months before his death. He stated clearly that he was of sound mind and that the decision was his alone. Every asset, our home, the accounts, the insurance policies belonged to me, to his children. He left $1 each and a letter of explanation to be read privately. At the mention of the trusts, Robert's voice cracked the silence. The grandchildren, he read aloud, would receive education funds totaling $8 million, but only if they maintained a relationship with their step-grandmother. The words with her approval seemed to echo through the room. Patricia looked up, stunned, and Jennifer's hand shook so hard she nearly dropped her glass. The restaurant was no longer a restaurant, it was a courtroom without walls. Forks hung in mid-air. The low hum of voices turned to stillness. I sat perfectly calm, my palms flat on the table, listening to their father's words rewrite the hierarchy they had always believed was untouchable. For once, I didn't have to defend myself. William was doing it for me. Patricia tried to laugh, but it came out wrong, thin and broken. Jennifer whispered that I must have manipulated him. Robert demanded to know what kind of man would abandon his family. I answered quietly that a man who'd watched his wife endure 8 years of humiliation had finally chosen to act. The letter ended with his signature, steady as ever, followed by one last line. To those who confuse blood with loyalty, consider this my correction. The next morning, I received a call from Harold Foster, William's attorney and one of the few people who had truly understood him. His voice was calm, almost too calm, as he asked if I was all right after the scene at the restaurant. I told him that peace was a relative term. He sighed and said, "You should expect noise. Magie. They're not going to let this go quietly." By noon, Patricia had already reached out, pretending she wanted a civil conversation. She used words like misunderstanding and family unity, but her tone betrayed calculation. I dealt with too many clients in my law years not to recognize the opening move of a negotiation. She wasn't grieving, she was strategizing. A day later, Harold called again. He'd been contacted by Robert's attorney, requesting a copy of the will and all supporting medical records. The implication was clear: they wanted to challenge William's mental competency. I almost smiled. I had expected this from the moment I saw the first flash of anger in Patricia's eyes. William had expected it too. Before his death, William had documented everything with the precision of a man who understood his children's greed. Harold had arranged for 3 separate medical evaluations, confirming his full mental capacity. There were video recordings as well. William, seated in Harold's office, explaining in his own words why he had chosen to protect me and his grandchildren from their parents' entitlement. In one clip, he looked straight at the camera and said, Love isn't proven by genetics, it's proven by presence. When Harold described the files, I felt an odd mix of sorrow and satisfaction. It was all there, the legal foundation of my defense. Already waiting, like a loaded chamber. The children thought they were playing chess. But William had left the board set 6 moves ahead. Contesting the will wouldn't just fail, it would trigger a clause removing their children from the education trusts entirely. That evening, Patricia called again, her voice tight with false sympathy. She said she didn't want things to get ugly. I told her that ugliness had already been their family tradition long before I arrived. What she didn't know was that the legal game had already begun. And every rule in it had been written by the man they underestimated most. 2 weeks later, a police cruiser pulled into my driveway just as I was pruning the roses. The officers stepped out, polite but firm, and asked if I was Margaret Collins. When I said yes, the younger one explained there had been a report of elder abuse claims that I'd manipulated my late husband's will through coercion and isolation. For a moment, I almost laughed. Patricia had finally played her hand. I invited them in, offered coffee, and answered every question without hesitation. They wanted to know about William's mental state, our marriage, the timeline of his estate changes. I told them the truth, calmly. Every word backed by documentation William had insisted on. When they asked for proof, I made one phone call to Harold Foster. Within an hour, Harold arrived with a leather briefcase and the calm of a man who'd seen too many bad actors lose their masks. He laid out every medical evaluation, every signed statement, and finally, William's recorded videos. The officers watched 3 of them. Silent and intent, William's voice filled the room, clear and steady, explaining that he'd changed his will because he had no patience left for cruelty disguised as family. When the officers left, I sat in the quiet and realized Patricia wasn't done. She was desperate. Her next move came through whispers. Dorothy, William's sister, called to tell me that Patricia and Jennifer had hired a private investigator to look into my background. They were hoping to find anything, an inconsistency, a secret that could undermine me. But they weren't the only ones with allies. That weekend, Tyler Moore showed up at my door, holding a shoebox. He looked nervous, almost guilty. He said he'd found something in his mother's attic letters from a man named Marcus. Inside were months of correspondence. Love letters mixed with instructions. Marcus had coached Patricia on how to pressure William into changing his will, even suggesting she convince him to name her co-trustee of the house. The last letter was dated 3 weeks before William's death. I felt the air go still around us. Patricia hadn't just tried to contest the will, she'd conspired to manipulate it while her father was dying. Tyler's voice shook when he said he'd hidden the letters so his mother couldn't destroy them. I told him he'd done the right thing. Then I called Harold again. And this time he brought someone new. Her name was Rachel Torres, a forensic estate analyst. She examined the letters with the precision of a surgeon and said what I already suspected. Patricia's actions were clear evidence of attempted estate fraud. What began as an accusation of elder abuse had turned into proof of her own corruption. William's children thought they were dragging me into a scandal. Instead, they'd opened the door to their own undoing. 3 days later, I invited all 3 Henderson children to my home. The dining room was bright with morning light. The table set with nothing but a box of letters and 2 thick folders. Harold Foster sat at one end, his expression composed, while Rachel Torres arranged the documents in careful stacks. When Patricia, Robert, and Jennifer walked in, the tension followed them like perfume. Patricia's eyes darted to the box before she even sat down. She must have recognized it, the shoebox Tyler had found in her attic. Robert looked confused. Jennifer already defensive. I waited until the silence felt unbearable. Then said that we were here to discuss their father's legacy one last time. No one spoke, but I saw fear settle in Patricia's shoulders. I opened the box and pulled out the top letter. Rachel read it aloud, her voice steady and clinical. The room froze as Marcus's words filled the air. Instructing Patricia to manipulate William during his final months, he told her to make him feel guilty and secure access to the assets before it's too late. Each sentence landed like a stone dropped into still water. When Rachel finished, I looked directly at Patricia. She tried to deny it, but her voice broke before the first sentence ended. Robert turned on her, disbelief written across his face. Jennifer pressed her hands to her temples, whispering that it couldn't be true. For the first time, none of them looked at me. They were too busy watching their family unravel. Harold explained the implications calmly. The letters were proof of attempted estate fraud, a felony under state law. Patricia could face criminal charges, and any beneficiary involved in such misconduct risked losing their claim to the family trusts. I told them I wasn't interested in destroying their futures, but I wanted the truth on record. I gave Patricia two choices. She could confess to her children, apologize for what she'd done, and accept that her father's judgment would stand. Or I could file the letters with the state and let the law decide what kind of daughter she'd been. Patricia broke down completely. Through tears, she admitted everything. Robert sat in silence. Jennifer couldn't look at her sister. When I stood, the decision was final. William's justice had spoken through me. Their father had built the trap years ago, but I was the one who closed it. 6 months later, the house finally felt quiet in a different way. The air no longer carried the tension of waiting for another accusation. Another phone call filled with blame. Tyler's laughter came from the garden as he helped me hang lights for his 18th birthday. The roses William planted bloomed again. Softer this time, as if even they were ready for peace. Patricia and Robert arrived together, subdued but present. They stood at the edge of the yard, watching their children talk with me. Unsure whether to step closer, Jennifer had moved to California, sending a birthday gift and a short note of apology that said more in its silence than its words. I didn't hold grudges anymore. I didn't have to. The truth had done all the work for me. As the sun lowered behind the trees, I sat in the chair William used to love, watching his grandchildren run across the lawn. Tyler called me Grandma Maggie for the first time, his voice sure and warm. In that moment, I realized what William had meant by family. It wasn't about bloodlines or last names. It was about who showed up when everything else fell apart. Later that night, after everyone left, I opened the letter William had written only for me. He said, "If they've learned, forgive them. If not, let the truth be your peace." I folded it carefully and placed it beside the last candle still burning on the table. The garden smelled like earth and forgiveness. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting to be accepted. I already was by the life I had built, by the people who had chosen to stay, and by the quiet kind of justice that never needed to raise its voice. Thank you for watching till the end. If this story moved you, hit subscribe. Share it with someone who still believes kindness can't be broken, and tell me where you're watching from. Your voice keeps our stories alive.